Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Channel. I am Josh Williams and I'm joined by Mo Stewart. Mo, how are you feeling, mate?
I've had better weeks, Josh. I'm not gonna lie. I'm sure I'm not alone in that thing. Some of you may have noticed that I'm in slightly different surroundings. Unfortunately, this isn't my kitchen. I've had to come and come over to Matt's house because I'm having some internet issues. But that's kind of been the way it's been, isn't it? This week has been all that optimism that we had last week. Admittedly, tempered optimism has been punctured, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, where do we start? Christ, I mean, it's been a while since we deconstructed an isolated game kind of on its own on this podcast. We've kind of moved away from that and moved towards like addressing overriding themes ongoing at the moment. But I mean, this was a mad one, wasn't it? This was obviously it finished 5-2, and there was lots of takes on the back of the game, lots of different opinions, lots of criticism, and that sort of thing, basically, obviously, which is understandable on the back of a 5-2 home defeat in the Champions League knockout stages. So we're going to dedicate most of the episode, I assume, to that, really. So, basic start, mate. What did you think of the game? What was your thoughts during the game immediately after final whistle and things like that?
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, if anyone wants to know what my immediate thoughts were, there's a post-match pint show on the Anfield Rap, which is literally out there. They put a microphone right under my nose, pretty much straight after the fight. And to be honest, I've done those shows quite often, and even within the emotion of post-match, I always try to be a bit level-headed. I couldn't after that game. I lost it. And what I said then and what I said now, I'll say now is the same, in as much as the most frustrating part of it is the things that we gave to Real Madrid. Real Madrid are allowed to be good. They're the European champions. They're the world champions. They've got quality, world-class players throughout the team. They're allowed to do very good things. But because they are so good, we absolutely cannot afford to gift them silly mistakes. And I don't just mean the kicking the ball at Real Madrid players when they're not even looking, but things that we've spoken about previously, set pieces, counterattacks, all of the greatest misses of the season came back to haunt us in that one night. And I just hope, as much as it's going to be damaging because it's on the international stage and it's an embarrassment, I hope it's one that we can get over quickly, because we absolutely can't afford to get caught up in this too much.
Yeah, I find this a difficult one to analyse, and it's a tricky one. After the game, in fact, it wasn't even after the game, by about like 70 minutes or so, I was just resigned that it was kind of over, foregone conclusion and that. But I didn't feel specifically, I have felt worse this season, put it that way. I think we've performed far worse than this on a number of occasions this season. If this one for me felt a bit more like, I think we played really well first half an hour, and I think there was a point in the game where we could have legitimately very easily been 3-1 up, and I think if that happens, the entire game takes a completely different course potentially. But I think the game went the way it did because of how much almost like certain moments in a game can impact the human elements and players' heads drop essentially. And I think Klopp has since kind of said that that's not allowed to happen. That's not professional footballers, champions, these players, and they seem very fickle to me when it comes to if something goes against them. If they concede first, if they suffer from a moment of bad luck, they're finding it difficult this season to react to that. But I think I felt up until a point Liverpool were competing really well against this Madrid side, and for a certain period dominating really. But it felt to me like the moments that went against us, the freak moments in particular, really impacted our mental state and how we then executed the rest of the game. If you see what I mean, I find it hard to explain.
I know exactly what you mean, and I couldn't agree more. It was very much a psychological thing, because if you look at the worst mistake, isolated incident, which was Alisson's goal, and I say it's Alisson's goal because you know what I mean. They did exactly the same thing. They did exactly the same thing as us 10 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
And how did it affect them? It didn't.
Exactly.
So you've got to think about the experience, and obviously Real Madrid have got more experience in this than everyone else, but we've got more experience in this than most. And the whole idea of how we react to setbacks and how bad it has been it's so glaring this season, because it always used to be one of our strengths. And you think if it's something we used to be good at and we've lost it, we should be able to get it back. But we're deep into the season now. It's February, and we've been having this problem pretty much throughout. So you do wonder if they can get it back, or, and this might feel like the nuclear option, we need a whole new squad, or at least a largely new squad. Because, I mean, it's kind of hits home more because it's Real Madrid. Because if you think about it, everybody knows about Real Madrid, the way that they can look terrible in games and they can suffer. And then by the end of 2 90-minute ties, they'll be up because they pick their points. And when they smell blood and weakness, they absolutely capitalize, which is what they did again. But everyone knows that. Liverpool know that better than most because we've played them a lot recently, not just the final. We played them in 2021, 2 legs in that game as well. And a lot of the same players on both sides were involved. So there should be no surprises. And I don't think there were surprises. What there were psychological scars from those games where we always seem to lose, despite being on top.
Yeah. Well, it felt a little bit similar in the Newcastle game, to be honest. Because in the Newcastle game, Liverpool started poorly, I felt, and were fortunate not to concede early. There was a moment where the camera panned to Klopp on the sides, and I was able to lip read him shouting at Henderson, and he basically said, "Wake them up," as if to say, like, we've started the game asleep here. And it wasn't until Núñez scored a goal against the run of play that Liverpool started playing a bit. Scored a second through Gakpo, and then the red card happened, and I suppose I think from the red card happened, we kind of played as though the game was won, and we just played as though we wanted the final whistle, and we were happy with the 2-0, and we didn't really know how to react to playing against 10 men for another hour, which was strange. But against Madrid, I want to clarify, I don't think Liverpool were good by any means. I don't think Liverpool played well, and I think specifically kind of reacting to Madrid's kind of comeback from like half an hour onwards. Liverpool, if you look at the expected goal timeline of the game, Liverpool start like a train, and from half an hour onwards, create very, very little. And Madrid just gradually climb because of the chances that they create as the game goes on. But it is a weird game to analyse, and one of the reasons I think it's weird is because obviously, ultimately, the large majority of fans react according to goals. Goals is what decides everything, and when you concede 5, it has to be a terrible performance in the eyes of many people. It has to be awful. There's nothing worse than that. But one of the things I want to touch on, just to kind of point out where I'm coming from with it, is let's say we didn't see the game. Let's say we were on a flight or something like that, and we land, and before seeing the results, we look at the stats. So if you look at the stats, right, shots, Liverpool posted 9, Real Madrid posted 9. Shots on target, Liverpool 5, Real Madrid 6. Possession, 52% Liverpool, 48% Real Madrid. Passes, Liverpool 555, Real Madrid 527. Exactly the same passing accuracy, exactly the same number of fouls. Liverpool 4 corners, Real Madrid 3. Now, if I was to look at those performance numbers there without seeing the scoreline, my guess would probably be a 1-0 draw.
Mm-hmm.
That's without looking at the expected goals. And then we move to the expected goals. attached to those 9 shots that both teams had. Liverpool's shots were worth about 1.9 goals. Real Madrid's shots were worth about 1.7 goals. So again, that's about a 2-2 draw if it's a normal game in terms of like finishing. And that's kind of why, even though it's, you know, in the spot on the spotlight, it's Champions League, it's Anfield, it's conceding 5 goals, it sounds horrendous. I honestly don't think it was that terrible. See where I'm coming from with that?
I do see where you're coming from that, and there are parts of the game that Liverpool did well, but again, once you watch the game, it kind of puts the stats into the wider context. And I do think that part of the reason why it was even is because Real Madrid, once they got to the 4th goal, they weren't really trying to score. They were just passing it around us. They were happy to kind of call. If you'd have said to them, "We'll blow the whistle now, 4-2," they were taking it, and they knew that they could keep the ball and keep us away without necessarily causing too much damage if they didn't go over. So that might have been why their attacking stats weren't quite so high. But
Even at the point though of the 4th goal, at the point of the 4th goal, that was when Real Madrid basically accumulated an expected goals of 1. Up until that point, Real Madrid didn't have. They had under 1 xG, but up until the 4th goal. So what I'm kind of saying there is, I know that it went a certain way and things like that, but 2 of the goals that Liverpool conceded, you just don't really ever concede. Like in terms of Alisson doing what he did, just doesn't happen. And in terms of the goal that's deflected off Gomez, just doesn't really happen. You know,
no.
and if that doesn't get deflected, it gets saved. And because football's such a low scoring sport, if those moments are slightly different, say Liverpool's 3rd goes in, or Gomez's thing doesn't get deflected, or Alisson makes that pass, those tiny moments, we can't let those tiny moments impact our entire perspective.
No,
Do
but
you see what I mean?
the problem is though, when we're analysing it, it's hard not to, because as we've
Yeah.
said, that's exactly what happened to the players on the pitch. They did let it get to them, and the thing is, you are right in as much as the kind of freak goals that those were shouldn't happen very often. You can't call them recurring, except that we can, because that's literally the 3rd time that's happened this season. And as much as you can try and play it off as a freak, once it's happened that many times, it's hard to. And that's where the psychology of, oh no, we've been here before, oh no, we're going back down this bad road comes in. And that's where it becomes all consuming. And I think there were times in the game where we needed to be more active and we were too passive. But then there were times in the game where we let emotion get ahead of us. And I feel like the 4th goal was one of those moments, because we're in kind of decent position just before. And then there's a period where Benzema's got the ball just on the edge of the area. And you see Fabinho, he's kind of in position to kind of react either way if he takes a shot. But what he does is he rushes towards him and he makes Benzema's mind up. He just lays off a simple ball, gets a return, and then suddenly he's in position to shoot. And again, it's just those little micro moments, like you say, which make a big difference. But every time you make a micro decision like that and it goes wrong, it seems to be weighing on us far too much. Now, obviously, players make mistakes like that in games all the time and always will. But it's the effect it has on you after, which is what's causing the issues. And I don't know, without bringing in a psychologist or a hypnotist, I'm not sure what the answer is.
Yeah, well, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at. I think what I'm suggesting really is that the general performance I don't think was that bad. I think it was more a case of when those moments did go against us, they had a serious impact on our mental state and our willingness to, our ability to fight back and play as normal and things like that. And it kind of snowballed a little bit. And I think one player who kind of sums up Liverpool's confidence issues, if you like, we have spoke about him in the past, is probably Joe Gomez. I don't really want to touch on him too much because I feel like we have, and he didn't have a great game again, but he kind of summed it up for me because it didn't take much for him to suddenly basically play as though he was skating on ice again.
Yeah.
And it's just a bit too fickle to be playing for Liverpool, really. You have to be able to cope with these setbacks at this level.
And it's true. And as much as you can look at it and say, well, it's affecting a lot of them, I think his particular malaise is probably the most worrying for me, or one of the most worrying for me, because it's like you said, it's that reliability. And you need that as a centre back, arguably more than any other player on the pitch, aside from the goalkeeper. You need to be steady. You need to be consistent. And at the moment, with Gomez and with Joel Matip, you see games where they're still able to reach their peak level, but you can't rely on it. You can't predict that it's going to be that way, because it's just as likely that they have a bad performance. And you can't build a defense that way, and you can't build confidence that way, because if you've not got the confidence in your centre-back pairing, then it's very hard to build anything else. And so that's a big problem for Jurgen Klopp. I don't know how he solves it now in the immediate term. Maybe the solve is Konate coming back, or maybe he's just got to be a little bit more careful with how he rotates the two of them. Maybe a bit more horses for courses to try and protect them a little bit. But even that's a short-term answer. And again, I think once we get to the summer, there's going to have to be a lot of difficult conversations. And the conversations that even I have probably changed my mind on over the course of this season.
That sounds like an ominous little line there, mate. But I think in terms of Gomez, it's weird because he's kind of sleepwalked into becoming an error-prone centre back, and those are really dangerous players to put on the pitch. We've seen what they can do over the course of the past decade or so. If you just look at certain players, like Lovren was one of them, very good centre back on his day, prone to just deciding the game on his own in a single moment of chaos. Arsenal have had a few of them over the years. Nicolas Otamendi comes to mind for Manchester City. Harry Maguire, maybe. Say that again.
Yeah.
David Luiz, definitely, yeah. Harry Maguire, potentially in certain moments. Marcus Rojo for Manchester United? These players, because of where they're playing on the pitch, and goalkeepers are the same. And this is why, over the course of analysing Anfield history, I am generally a lot less forgiving with centre backs and goalkeepers than I am with forwards. I'm a lot more patient with forwards, but with centre backs and goalkeepers, because of where they're playing and what they're doing, if they make an error, you probably can, like a big one, you probably can see the goal. And if you can see the goal in football, it's enough to decide the result in an instant like that. And rather than getting 3 points or 1 point, you get 0, and it can just have a massive impact, basically.
Yeah.
And Gomez, I've never really associated with that, but just with time, it's becoming a case of whenever he's on the ball, or whenever he's when the ball got played through and he passed it to Alisson, and then Alisson gives the ball away and we conceded. When he was running through to deal with that ball, part of me just felt like he was going to fall over or something. I don't know what it was, and I never used to feel that way with him.
No,
but it's just kind of developed with time, and I hope it's not beyond the point where it can be salvaged.
Well, I mean, one little thing I would say about in that goal in particular, I do put more blame on Alisson than Gomez, because frankly, Alisson can pass the hand up.
I agree.
He doesn't play it back to Gomez. But you're right. When he was in that situation, I was fearful, because it feels like the kind of thing where things could go wrong, and we don't have that trust in him anymore because of that. And I think trust is a big part of this. I'm still not convinced that he trusts his body in the same way he used to. And if you think about how he used to defend at his peak, he was a great reader of the game, but he would rely on his pace and his strength to get him out of trouble so often. And it can't anymore. And if you don't believe that you can do it in the way you can, that's where indecision sets in. And that's almost cancer for a centre back, because once it sets in, it's so hard to get rid of. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Joe Gomez. The question is, though, if he is to the point where we can't use him anymore, normally you'd say as a fourth choice centre back, a third choice centre back, he can still play for Liverpool quite easily. Because when you've got a third or fourth choice centre back, you manage their games so they're playing in specific times. They're not overplaying. They're playing with optimum partners, all those kind of things. That's kind of the point of having the reserve guys. But unfortunately, with Liverpool, we can't really say that because our injury rate is so high that we are regularly having to rely on third, fourth, fifth choices in big games. I mean, we talk about Stefan Bajcetic. We've all been very, very glowing about him. Last week, we were saying all the great things about him. And I still believe all of those great things. But this Real Madrid game showed that Bajcetic is good enough to play for Liverpool, but he should not be in Liverpool's best 11.
Yeah.
like we should be able to play better players and more experienced players to play up against Real Madrid in the Champions League.
Well, I think the same applies to Henderson actually in the midfield, because I think Carragher made a good point after the game in his I think it's CBS coverage. He basically said that in no way, shape, or form should we really be kind of like angry with the likes of Henderson and Milner, because in essence they have done their job. They have delivered over the course of their peak for like 10 years or whatever at Anfield. The problem is that, and I think we said this earlier in the season when Milner was playing every week, the problem isn't necessarily them. It's that they are playing every game in the middle, including the biggest games, when they're at a point now where they should probably be players who are coming on for the last 20 minutes, potentially. So you've got Henderson there over the hill, and you've got Bajcetic who hasn't even arrived at the hill yet. So it sums up the issue that we've had all season in that we've got a group of lads who aren't ready and a group of lads who have stopped delivering to the same level as they once did. So I think that kind of captures it really.
Yeah, and I mean, you can look at the team, and I was kind of pleased in some ways that it was unchanged from Newcastle, because it was a sign that they might be able to start building something. We were talking last week about the momentum that was being built. But the flip side of that, and we mentioned it, is there was only 74 hours between the Newcastle game and the Real Madrid game. And we have seen the evidence that the midfielders outside of Bajcetic, the ones who have been rested, have come on to perform better. So the improvement in Henderson and Fabinho's play over the last two games was after a period where they were long out of the team. And then they gave a week between Everton and Newcastle. They were still effective, maybe not quite as much. And then you have 3 days to play Real Madrid. And you just think that they're not going to be able to replicate it. And that's how it proved. And the worst part about it is that you can very much pinpoint the moments, because Fabinho in particular, he played well early on. He was doing lots of the old Fabinho things. He was winning tackles. He was reading where Real Madrid were planning to pass the ball. He was intercepting, and he was making a positive impact on the game. And then he wasn't. And when he wasn't, it was almost like he dropped off an actual cliff. Because if you look at I think it was the fourth or the fifth goal. I think it might have been the fifth goal, actually. And there's a moment where the counter-attack's on and they got past him. Now, they were about half a yard past him when I knew he wasn't getting back. And you can't play that way against a team like Real Madrid if you've got a guy who can give you something for a little bit, but then once that little bit's over, he's useless. Like, it might seem harsh, and we know that he's not always been this way, but this has been happening for long enough to say that we can't just discount it. And like I said, you'd mentioned Henderson is another one, and there are lots of players in this team for who that's happened to all at the same time. Yeah,
I think one of the issues with Fabinho is the absolute lack of recovery pace. It's just not there whatsoever. And he was the moment where you think he gets glided past by Modric. He showcases a real lack of desire to actually even attempt to get back. So I'm not really sure what's going on with Fabinho. 29, but he looks about 35, mate.
Well, I mean, I don't know who brought him up, but there was a stat released recently that in terms of actual playing time, his career, he's played the minutes of a 35-year-old. So that's probably got something to do with it. He's played that much that it's as if what would an average 35-year-old's career would look like. So but that can't be a small part of it. But you're right. His attitude once he's in that period where he's got nothing left to give, I don't like it. And I don't think it's conducive to the group surviving well. But the other flip side to that is how much of this is down to the manager. Because if we can sit here and notice those things and be aware of that, then so should he. And this is going to be another Analysing Anfield show where I talk about the fact that I'm surprised that Naby Keita didn't get more minutes. I feel like a broken record here. And you can talk about his, you can talk about what you think about him as a player in the long term and how you think that maybe it's not worth Liverpool keeping him. Obviously, we're probably not going to keep him now. But the fact remains is that within this season where we're at now, Naby Keita would have been more useful in those last 45 minutes than any of the guys who played in midfield outside of Bajcetic. And I don't know the reasons why he wasn't playing. That's the other part. I don't know what they are. There may be good reasons that we don't know about. I'm not sure.
Yeah, maybe he's potentially scarred from the early substitution a few years back against Madrid in the Champions League.
Or maybe Klopp thinks he is.
Yeah. No, that's what I mean. I mean, as in Klopp scarred by it, not Naby.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Real Madrid, mate, it's just such a weird, curious side in the Champions League. It's absolutely mad. I've just touched on the expected goals earlier. You know, Real Madrid posted 1.7 xG, scored 5, which suggests that the finishing or the luck or whatever was massively on their side. And I've just been looking at the graphics now attached to last season. I remember touching on this for his last season when Dave was still on the podcast. This is Real Madrid in the knockouts, right? So last season in the knockout stages, Real Madrid, I think this might have been before the final. So against PSG, Chelsea and City, 2 legs each time. They posted an XG of 7.8 in total, and they scored 14. Like that's absolute stepping up in when the spotlight is on you. You know, proper Hollywood Champions League knockout stages, and finding a way essentially.
And the XG against will probably be equally as remarkable because it wasn't.
Well, it is. Yeah. It's kind of on point, really. I suppose they give away goals worth 10.4. Sorry, they give away shots worth about 10.4 goals, and they conceded 11. So when it comes to the opponents that they've faced, the opponents have scored to a bang average standard expected level, whereas Real Madrid have exceeded what is normal. And if you even look at the final against Liverpool dominated the game and really should have won that game. And I think Liverpool posted next year around 2 or so. Real Madrid created one chance really, and it was the one that they scored. So they do just have this way about them where they're just so ruthless when it comes to the Champions League. It's scary.
But they bend and they don't break. And they're really good at spotting opportunities and knowing the tempo and flows of games and ties. And I think that's where it comes in. It's not just about having the experience. It's about knowing how to use that experience. And like I said earlier about the way that they kind of shut it down in the second half. Like I've been looking at the SofaScore stats here. And if you look at the average positions, like in the second half, when they made the substitutions, there was basically a cluster of Real Madrid players, 7 of them who were all kind of in the Trent area, as we call it, in terms of when they were from their attacking left half going into Trent's area. And if you look at Liverpool's map, then they basically matched them up because it's almost as if, okay, well, this is where all the Real Madrid players are. We need to bring ourselves over here. But then what you get is just a cluster of players, and that's when technical ability and emotional intelligence comes into it. And Real Madrid have the technical ability. Liverpool also have the technical ability, as they showed in patches in that early period. But what they didn't have was the mentality to be able to wait it out, because they played themselves right into Real Madrid's trap. Real Madrid passed around them. They didn't need to do any more than they did. And then they just took advantage when they were given the opportunities.
Yeah.
They are a good side, as I mentioned. They're allowed to be a good side.
Yeah.
I think the thing going on, and we are eventually going to have to draw a line under this, thankfully, is that Liverpool, as you mentioned, if you look at the stats, Liverpool did lots of good things in this game. I think if you look back to the early part in the game, the irony, when you consider the way the second goal was conceded, is that our passing out for the back in the early periods was fantastic. If you go back and look at that first goal,
Yeah,
it was a brilliant move, started from Alisson. Every single player touched the ball. Real Madrid got one block in, but it went straight back to Bajcetic. Everyone was involved. We had our patterns of play. We knew where everyone was going to be. There were passes that were crisp, they were to the feet, and they allowed us to beat the press, get out, and get into a position to score the goal. We were able to do that quite a few times in that early time. Now, this is the part we need to take and go forward and say, yes, we can do it. We are capable. And I mean, if you look across the two games, Real Madrid and Newcastle, 3 of the 4 goals that we scored were excellent, outstanding goals that required a lot of passing, a lot of movement, and a lot of execution. So we have it in there. We have to concentrate on the good things that we've done and say we need to do more of them, and then kind of deal with the bad things later. Like what we do at set pieces, I don't even know. I genuinely, I've run out of ideas. I think if we're going to touch on the goal, the third goal, I do want to mention communication, because I've seen lots of people just blaming Trent alone.
Trent is not to blame.
Well, no. I mean, he has some blame, but only in as much as when you're in the zone and a runner runs from your zone to somewhere else, you have to let them know. Communication is the most important thing in zonal marking, because that's how, if you're looking at attackers trying to beat zonal marking, they move from one zone to another. So you have to be letting people know. So if you look at the challenge of Nunes on Eder Militao, it's too late, because he doesn't know he's there, because Nunes' position is to just look for the ball, and when it comes, head it. So that's all he's concentrating on. He doesn't know there's a runner. But the people who just watched him run past him, they do, and they needed to be speaking. And that communication, particularly when it happens 2 minutes after a half time, when we probably spent the whole 15 minutes talking about how they need to start, all the things they need to do to get right, and they all went out the window. That's why that goal annoyed me so much.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I tend to almost remove goals conceded from set pieces from the performance of the team, and I look at them almost as like separate, as in if you concede a goal from a set piece, that's not going to happen every week type thing. So we did concede a goal from a set piece, and that was why part of me was a bit like, it's almost group it with the 2 free goals that we conceded. But having looked back at it, it is very poor. And I think the reason it happens the way it does, I think the way the position of the free kick is, I think we're expecting either a kind of whipped shot towards the back stick or a delivery towards the back stick. And we've kind of completely ignored the fact that there's a really vacant space kind of on where the line of the 6-yard box is drawn.
Mm-hmm.
And Militao, as you say, just kind of initially positions himself on the back stick, which Liverpool probably think they've got it covered, and then he just drifts past each Liverpool player one by one towards the front and just has a completely free header. So it does look extremely amateurish.
It does.
I agree with you that Trent should say something, but I do think it happens so quickly that even if he opens his mouth when he first recognises it, I still think Militao probably just gets there before anyone can do anything about it. It's just one of them where I think strangely for this one, the original kind of setup was really easily exploitable, where there was just a massive space for the player to just drift into.
And this is another thing about mentality. I'd like to think that defenders, particularly when you think about the way that set pieces teams have been targeting us. Yes, you say that all teams concede set pieces at all times. That's definitely true. But what's also definitely true is that every team that prepares to play Liverpool is working on it because they know that we're weak at it right now. So with that context, I'd like to think that the team itself would be hyper vigilant, and communication we've already mentioned should be working. But like you say, if there's a massive gap at the front post, and it was a massive gap at the front post, and the star striker in Karim Benzema is hanging out on the edge of the area. Yes, we had Cody Gakpo looking at him. But if I'm a defender and I see that, I'm thinking, okay, well, someone's probably going to move into this area. So we should be paying attention. And again, I'm not a defender. I've not played professional football. But I thought that. And they should have thought that too.
Yeah, well, one thing that's curious though, you mentioned set pieces there. One thing that's interesting, I did look at this earlier today, and if you look at the Premier League this season, Liverpool have conceded 4 goals from set pieces. Only one team in the Premier League is better than Liverpool in that sense, and that's West Ham. West Ham have only conceded 1, but Liverpool have conceded 4. Spurs have conceded 4. Manchester City have conceded 4. Arsenal have conceded 4. And in terms of shots faced from set pieces, Liverpool have conceded 58. Arsenal, top of the league, conceded 55. So I think this set piece issue seems to be a really current trend where since Brentford, we've just fell off a cliff. I mean, Van Dijk went off in that game halfway through the match with an injury, but since he came back, the issues have persisted a little bit. We looked all over the place against Newcastle. Just one sec. One thing I was going to say then, I was with Chris Pajak earlier, and he had a really interesting point, actually. It just made me think, and he said, could it be a case of, because Klopp is maybe dedicating so much work to getting Liverpool fixed in open play, maybe we've took the foot off the gas behind the scenes with set pieces, and it's resulted in that department coming down. Just complete speculation, but
I mean, it's possible, definitely. I mean, there is one of those situations where, and this happened in 2021, when you've got lots of problems, you're in a situation where solving one might cause another. And it's almost like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul and just trying to move stuff around. So I can see a world where that happens. But again, at this stage, having had that much many issues with it, you'd have thought it'd have moved up the priority list. But you're right, it definitely is a recent thing, because the first one wasn't until Nottingham Forest on the 22nd of October. So we've done a lot then. And as much as 4 is good in the Premier League, that doesn't count the 3 that we conceded set pieces in the FA Cup, and the 3 that we conceded between Bournemouth and Brighton that were actually disallowed. And yes, you can say, oh, well, if it was disallowed for VAR, then that means that we did the right thing. Not always the case. There was one at Chelsea that got disallowed right in the first minute that we got lucky from. It's not. You're right. It's not been a whole season problem, and therefore you can't say Liverpool are massively worse than everyone else. But it's a problem that's getting worse at the moment, and until we solve it, every team is going to try and target us at it, and it's going to be a point of weakness. And when you're dealing with a team that's got such fragile confidence, these things become magnified, I think.
Yeah, it feels a bit like a wound that we've got, but that we're not actually treating, and is gradually getting infected a bit more. That's kind of what it's like. But yeah, I mean, I suppose to kind of round up the Madrid chat, one thing I've found interesting since the game is I've seen a lot of definitive takes, a lot of firm words and things like that, and people have now started to say, I've seen a few different pundits, journalists say specifically it's the end of an era, right? I think Thierry Henry said it as well in his coverage. Now, in my opinion, it's been the end of an era for about 6 months. So I'm not really sure why this game specifically has signalled the fact that it's the end of an era, because I think that was already clear. But what I wanted to ask you, I mean, I haven't actually let you prepare for this in advance, but if we're thinking about Klopp's next team, so from next season onwards, who are the pillars for Klopp to kind of build his next team around? If you think about like those players who are fixed in place, pretty much guaranteed. I did a little bit on it earlier in the week, and if I'm being really setting the bar pretty high, I had 6 pillars for me. What about yourself?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because when you talk about the next team, you're not just talking about next season. You're talking about a team that can potentially stay together and compete for 2 to 3 seasons. So that makes the bar higher because you look at the age profile, as we've already mentioned, of the players that we've got at the moment, and there's lots of them that within that 3-year span may well already be beyond their usefulness.
Well, let's say between 2018 and 2022, the 11 that was fixed for Klopp was Alisson, Trent, Van Dijk, Matip, Robertson, Fabinho, Wijnaldum or Thiago, give or take, Henderson, Salah, Mane, Firmino. That is the first Klopp team, in my opinion. Now, in terms of the second team, and I'm talking like pillars, so not just lads you'd keep around. I mean like the ones who are still going to be starters and are still going to be, say, when we get in our next Champions League final, they're going to be pillars of strength again to lean on or whatever, you know what I mean?
It's difficult because my gut thinks that we'll have more of them around in that period. But if you're asking me who do I think should be the pillars, I'll say Alisson, I'll say Trent, I'll say Kanate, I'll say Luis Diaz, and I'll say everyone else has got a question mark against them.
Okay. I had Alisson, Trent, Kanate, Nunes, and my 2 older players who just about kind of made the grade for me was Salah and Van Dijk. I know Van Dijk's 31. I think Salah might be 30. But if you look at, I think Real Madrid are a great example, really. If you think of the teams that have dominated Europe for Real Madrid over the past decade, certain players have been consistent since the beginning, like Benzema, Modric, Cruz, Danny Carvajal to an extent. Ronaldo was there for a certain period, moved on. Ramos was there for a certain period. Varane, Casemiro, Marcelo for a period. But
Lucas
each one,
Vasquez, Pepe,
yeah,
Asensio, Isco, like
each
squad
one's
almost
gradually being
completed.
phased out. Yeah, but I think certain players like the likes of Modric and Cruz are good enough to last beyond one specific period of dominance and also take part in the next team. And for me, considering Salah's just signed a new deal, and I do think I know he's had a bit of an iffy season, but I do think Salah is generally fine, and you don't have to worry about him whatsoever as long as everything around him is working. And once that's resolved, I think Salah again will be fine for another couple of years. So I would have Salah in there, and in terms of Van Dijk, I think his is more to do with credit he's got in the bank. I do have some concerns there. Maybe with experience's peak, is this now the decline? How stark is the decline? Is the decline still he's top 5 in the world? But he just about, because of everything he offers his overall game, you know, in every department, set pieces and distribution and everything like that, availability as well as a massive one. He just about made the grade for me. But they were my 6 that I think Klopp's next team can be constructed around. And the rest, Robertson was close considering he's 28. Diaz could have easily been in there, to be honest. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting question to think about.
No, I think if you told me that Robertson, Salah, and Van Dijk were also in there and also still performing well, I wouldn't be surprised. I can see that world. I think the only reason I didn't put them in is because though the other 4 were my absolutes. The thing with Salah and Van Dijk, as I say, you can see a world where they do continue to contribute. And I do believe that in Salah's case in particular, Liverpool are planning for them to be going that long. But you can also see a world where they're not. And with Van Dijk, it's different because obviously we are now nearly 2 years, well, a year and a half since his injury occurred, not a year and a half, obviously, since he's come back. And I do think that he's playing slightly differently. I don't think it's massively noticeable. Obviously, the whole team has been poorer, so it's noticeable. But I just think in terms of how he approaches it, like people are, yeah, I think people are concerned about, oh, he's not engaging. But he kind of never really did that. He always used to do the whole kind of Jedi mind trick defending, which I all loved, by the way. But the problem is that I don't think everyone's quite as scared of the Jedi anymore. So they are making him do more defending, and he doesn't like it. And I do think that difference in how he's having to approach the game and how he's choosing to approach the game is having an effect on his partners as well. Because if you think about the natural order of things, both Gomez and Matip, when they're playing with Virgil, are naturally submissive. He is the organizer. He is the one who sets the tone. They have their roles within it, and they do them well. But if they're having to do more because Virgil's not able to do as much as he was, then that's going to put them out of whack. It doesn't really affect Konate in the same way because he's still young. He's still early in his career. He still wants to go out and fight everybody and tackle every ball. So that kind of works. He's happy to take on the extra workload. But for Gomez and Matip, who are used to having to do one thing and having this big security blanket next to them, I think part of that change is affecting them as well.
Yeah, I think with Van Dijk, it is interesting to see what kind of happens with him. What you was touching on there with the whole Jedi thing, I actually think, for me, what my interpretation of it would be, it looks to me like with time, he's become more reliant on that, rather than players not being scared of it anymore, which might be the case now. But I think earlier in the season, it looked like he was relying on it too much to solve problems, to the extent that he almost looked in certain moments a little bit lazy / complacent. And I think specifically Manchester United away, the goal where he's got his hands behind his back and he chooses not to close the ball down and throw himself at it. It's just a bit of a lazy. It just looks like a lazy decision. And there's been a few of them occasions this season, so maybe he just needs a rocket up his backside or something like that. I don't know.
And again, it's weird because that's another one of those things that used to be a strength and now appears to be a weakness.
And but the thing with Van Dijk, though, I do think his floor is still exceptionally high, and I think even when he's at his worst, he's still really, really good. So this is why I kind of think, like, even if he is 31, even if he's no longer this demigod of a centre half, I still think he's a title winning. I still think he's a title winning centre half. If you look at some of the players who he can win a league with, look at the Arsenal's back to at the minute, Saliba and Gabriel. I think Gabriel in particular, you know, Van Dijk is still probably on that level comfortably for me.
It's good. I mean, when you've got someone who's been so good for so long and has been at that high level, you've always got to. It's always going to be difficult to replace, and it is going to be almost impossible to replace him, because how do you phase someone in to replace someone who pretty much is going to play every week anyway when he's fit? Because he still is going to be that, because as you say, he still has that level, he still has that importance to the team. So it's going to be a difficult job to try and replace him anyway. But I think for that reason, Liverpool will probably try to keep him as at that high level for as long as possible, and hopefully get someone else in who can rise to that level. But yeah, I think as a potential next league-winning pairing, Van Dijk and Konate can do the job.
Yeah, I think it's interesting actually that we've just mentioned about pillars, and neither of us mentioned the single midfielder. Tells a story, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that obviously Stefan Bajcetic will still be there.
Yeah,
in that time, but
yeah, I agree. But maybe I don't think he's a pillar. I don't think he's a pillar to build your next team around. Maybe the one after.
Yeah, exactly. He's still coming through. But yeah, I think we've spoken a lot in terms of the midfield. We've kind of spoken them to death. I don't think any of them are going to be leading the next revolution, but that doesn't mean to say that I'm also getting rid of all of them.
Yeah.
Not necessarily.
Not yet, anyway. But yeah, I mean, just looking at a quick look forward then before we kind of finish. How are you now looking at Crystal Palace? Because obviously, as I said, the uproar on the back of this defeat, because we conceded 5, I felt was a tiny bit excessive, to be honest. And I'm not now looking at Palace and dreading it. Whereas a couple of weeks ago, I was dreading Brighton, and Wolves beat us 3-0 and things like that, and Brighton beat us twice. In fact, I think in the space of like 2 weeks or something like that. This game, I think Liverpool's attack is kind of getting there. Against Everton, we posted next year of 2.2. Against Newcastle, albeit 10 men, we posted next year of over 2 again. And against Real Madrid, we posted next year of 1.9, which is very close to 2. So I think the attack's on its way. We just need to be a bit better defensively. But how are you feeling ahead of Palace?
No, 100%. And that's why when I said at the beginning of the show that we need to put this game to bed as quickly as possible, that's exactly what I mean, is that we have other things to do and we can't afford to junk all of the good things that we did in that game because of the bad things. And you're right, we were good enough to score 2 goals, and that's 3 games in a row we've been good enough to score 2 goals. So yeah, I'm telling you, if you're telling me we scored 2 goals at Selhurst Park on Saturday night, I'm telling you I think we probably win that game, because as much as we're concentrating on ourselves right now, Crystal Palace aren't playing very well at the moment. They haven't won, I think, in 6 games. They've gone without a win. They haven't got Will Zaha at the moment. He's out injured, and that makes them weaker. So we're all looking at this thinking, oh, goodness, this is a horrible time. As the Liverpool fan, we just conceded 5 goals. Oh, woe is us. We're all terrible. Palace have got problems too. And I think that 2 teams who potentially confidence-wise might be low, if you look at the ability within them, we should be better. And as I said, the step forward the attack has made in recent weeks should be enough on its own to say that we go into this game with a strong chance of winning. And we need to have the belief that we have that. However, I do think in order to do that and to maintain that, there does need to be a couple of tweaks to the starting lineup. I would necessarily say, obviously, I think Gomez is coming out. I believe he's listed as injured. I think that might have been why Matip came on. So you assume Matip comes in. Midfield, I would be making some changes. I think it's probably safe to say you know what I'm going to say, so I won't even need to say it. As for the attack,
would you play Henderson as a 6 by any chance, or would you keep Fabinho there?
I think the partnership has started to be built a little bit between Bajcetic and Fabinho. They're able to kind of flatten out to play a double pivot a few times, I've noticed. I'm not sure whether or not Henderson can do that as well. So I might be tempted to give him the rest and keep Fabinho going. But it is a bit of a coin flip in that respect. So if you told me you were going to do the other one, I'd be like, okay, let's see how it goes. But I wouldn't be playing both of them on Saturday, no. And the other thing about this game as well, which I didn't mention, if you look at the way it's fallen, it's an opportunity for us, because Newcastle and Manchester United aren't going to be adding to their points tally because they're playing the League Cup final. Spurs are playing against Chelsea. Brighton aren't going to be adding to their tally either because they would have been playing Newcastle, so they're sitting at home kicking their heels. So that's 5 teams, and they aren't all going to win. And possibly only one of those 5 teams is going to win. So if we win, then suddenly everything looks a lot better. So we, as I said, we need to forget how bad that was. And I'm hoping that for all of you who've been watching this show goes a little bit of the way to doing that, because it has done it for me.
Yeah, I do think we can draw the line under the sand in that one and just kind of accept that this season we were probably never going to win the Champions League anyway. And the way we're kind of going out the competition, even though it was not a great night, and I appreciate that we were not great, I still think it was kind of one of them daft games, which was just crazy and things happened and just your head's dropping. It's just really difficult games to make sense of, to be honest. So we have a chance when it comes to the Premier League. We have a relatively nice run over the next couple of weeks, I think.
Mhm.
So I just hope that Liverpool turn up and play like we did against Everton. And hopefully we showcase some decent performance numbers and go in the right direction, even though we've just fell off a cliff against it, losing 5-2 against Real Madrid. But I do think you can turn it around with performances.
Hey, we've been saying this whole show, it's all about how you come back from setbacks. This is the time to prove it.
Yeah, well, Selhurst Park will be a test in that sense. But thanks for joining us, Mo.
No worries. Thanks for the last time I have to talk about this game for at least for at least 2 weeks anyway. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, mate. Yeah, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.